This is a public workshop called by the LaPorte County Drainage Board, asking the representatives of the city of LaPorte to come in regarding an issue that's been at the forefront of at least the Drainage Board's attention for the last month regarding the Schurz Ditch. We've invited representatives of the city of LaPorte to come here to address some of those concerns, both with what was going on as a result of a motion last month to issue an injunction, which resulted in a stop work order, which then resulted in the city ultimately stopping the dewatering or pumping on a certain area. Now they're dewatering or pumping into a retaining basin that they constructed. I had the opportunity to meet with Rich Brzezinski and the city representatives about 2 Fridays ago. So we had some of the information, but this is probably the best way for the city to provide the rest of the board that same information, both about how this project or problem started, what was ultimately done, what the current status is, and maybe what the future plans are for that area east of town. The Schurz Ditch has been a problem, and I think we got plenty of documents from a property owner here showing that this has been an issue for decades. So we've got a problem of immediate concern, which was the dewatering and the pumping that was adding to the Schurz Ditch, or allegedly adding to the Schurz Ditch. And we've got a long-term problem that needs a long-term solution. I don't know how much of that we'll get into today, but hopefully the city can at least address the short-term, and we can start working together to alleviate the concerns of the property owners out there. So we've got Nick Otis, the city attorney here. We've got Nick Minnick, the city engineer. I would defer to them if Nick Minnick, if you want to come up and if you can kind of relay the same information that you gave to Rich and myself on that Friday meeting to our other board members. Thank you.
Okay. And we talked a little bit about the broad benefits of the project at the last meeting, but kind of going over where we left off with the Friday meeting was the city incurred some overtime in order to construct the basin as quickly as possible. Once the basin was constructed, we started dewatering to the basin instead of dewatering to that south end of the site. The contractor had some constructability concerns with continuing to dewater to the basin. So then last week, at the end of last week, we switched over to, we coordinated with our wetland consultant, Soil Solutions, who talked to Army Corps, and as our contractor was coming by to dewater, they'd inadvertently dewatered the wetland on the north end of the project. So Army Corps said it'd be appropriate to recharge that. So they're recharging that for a few days, and then Boyd Boulevard is closed today. So after today, all dewatering will go into the combined sewer. I know I provided everybody a memo, just kind of a brief overview of the project last time. One of the things that changed in there was it was kind of, our contractor just gotten back from vacation, was struggling to find out how much we were actually dewatering, and in that memo it talked about 200 gallons per day, and 200 gallons per minute per pump, and it's actually 125, so it wasn't as much as we had originally thought either. So the contractor has the basin completed, and they're moving towards Boyd Boulevard, and then they'll move north. As I mentioned, dewatering is now going into the combined sewer, and it's going at a rate that our combined sewer can handle that. So in addition, after the last Drainage Board meeting, Jerry Jackson put a level monitor at the structure where it enters the 18-inch pipe, and we have the level data for all of that. And then Jerry and county employees observing sampled the water for quality.
Say the 18-inch pipe, that you mean the start of the
pipe. Yeah.
Pipeline or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, exactly.
Is the water down to the top of that pipe?
No. I don't know when the water is down to the top of that pipe seasonally, but my guess is it's not often down to the top of the pipe. And Jerry's been tracking the data, but essentially even during that period where we were finishing our basin, we were seeing just a slight blip and a little ups whenever a storm event, but we weren't seeing increases like we were concerned about. So it's steadily come down. How far?
It's about 6 to 8 inches down from
Like down from the peak heights?
From the peak height, yep, 6 or 8 inches down from the peak height. So,
Other than Louis here, does anybody know that where the outlet of that pipe is? And that there's no other source feeding into that pipe before it exhales, you might call it?
Seems unlikely. It parallels the railroad track for a while, then through the cornfield, and it daylights out of the ditch. It daylights into the ditch, rather. It seems unlikely there's another connection.
Right underneath 4, right? Highway 4, just right.
That you can, it daylights long before that, far north of that point.
So it could let some more water in at another point?
I don't follow.
No. We don't. No.
Well, if there's not a roof over it,
It's open ditch.
pipe coming along, open ditch for a while, then it's back underground until it gets at the end where it came out at Highway 4.
It's all open until 4. It's all open all the way until 4.
It's an open ditch from almost the railroad down to Highway 4.
Okay, I was thinking that tile was popping out at 4.
No, pops out way north.
There's 1,700 feet of tile past.
Because I thought when he took us down there to see where it was exhausting on there, I thought that was way more than 18 inches could let loose in that long of a run.
No, and Jerry, you were able to observe the outlet of the 18-inch outlet.
I was. I climbed down in the ditch. It's hard. It's in the middle of the cornfield. It's hard to get down there.
Tough to
It
get
seemed
back there.
consistent to me what was going through the ditch and the cornfield with what you easily sort of down before. You know, it does drain some more ground there because there's a pond and some of that ground is level, so it could increase that road between Tile and Highway 4.
All right. That's kind of what I was expecting because of how much I saw coming out of that. And I don't even remember a date we saw that. That was after a rain of some sort, too.
It was coming out pretty good then.
And one thing that I think came out of the meeting too that I wanted to add right away too was we weren't aware of the state laws. Kind of seemed a little buried, that was inadvertent discharge to, or indirect discharge to a legal drain. So we've agreed, and there's absolutely no issue with this. We will put in our construction standards in the future. So any of our projects will be designed where if the contractor is going to dewater, that they need to get the approval of the drainage board. So we'll have that in all of our standards, and we'll make sure that that's a requirement in the future for any contractors that would need to do dewatering as part of a project.
And for the board's information, the statute they're citing to comes out of the drainage code. It says that a municipality may not construct, reconstruct, or maintain a drain that is located partially or within their corporate boundaries of the municipality and will flow directly or indirectly into a regulated drain under which this board has authority. So that was the concern here, is the indirect flow, or the allegations of indirect flow into the Schurz ditch from the county's drain or the county's maintenance project. What that statute goes on to say is that if the municipality is doing that, they have to file a written request with this board, and then the surveyor goes out and determines what impact that's going to have on the regulated drain. And the city then has to enter commitments to address those impacts, whether it's damage to the adjacent property or the reconstruction of the county drain as it's taking on the additional flow. So that's what didn't happen here. Whether it should have happened at the beginning, I think what the city's saying is that they weren't aware the dewatering was going to be necessary as part of this project. And we do take it in good faith that the project they're working on is of benefit both to the city and the county as a whole. And I think if you want to explain to the board a little bit more what the particular project is doing so that we can understand the grand scheme of things, that'll help.
So the project, and just kind of to reiterate from the last meeting, is basically a sewer separation project. So we are providing a basin for stormwater flows. We've designed it to handle up to a 100-year storm, and that basin will take stormwater from the kind of northeast eighth of the city, more or less, and then also from an area this is especially important to us in our wellhead protection area. So we normally like to see infiltration as one of our primary methods of relieving stormwater, but in a wellhead protection area, we really don't want to see that. So this actually takes full build out of that area. It accommodates the stormwater in full build out of the basin. So this project has benefits in that it's reducing. So the full build out of the basin is about 270 million gallons. So it's taking 270 million gallons away from what would otherwise be going to the wastewater treatment plant. So in major storm events, it's hopefully reducing the potential of a combined sewer overflow. And then it's also, in turn, benefiting Travis Ditch, which Sure Ditch is tributary to Travis Ditch. So I think we're looking at kind of the larger picture, trying to handle our stormwater, one, as a natural resource like it is, and then trying to do it in a way that's better for the overall community. The vision we had for this property, we wanted to buy the entirety of the Spear Farm. We weren't able to fund it. We didn't have enough money to do that. So the vision we had for this property was really a stormwater kind of demonstration project and almost stormwater park, where we're able to create a natural resource amenity within the community that helps treat and maintain our stormwater in a way that doesn't impact downstream and is as healthy for the environment as possible. So that's the intent of what we're doing, and we're really trying to look at kind of long-term solutions to better manage stormwater within the city, and to do it in a way that doesn't impact negatively the downstream end. So
I feel like we're at this point, and the history don't really matter where we're at. We just got to better what's happened, and we got to fix the problem to go on. So we need to look at long-term plans or short-term plans that lead into long-term plans.
So the city formed a stormwater utility at the end of last year, and we implemented those fees this spring, and we're actually in the process of meeting with and soliciting proposals for a stormwater master plan for the entirety of the city. I think that having them look at Sure's Ditch as part of that master plan, and making sure that, one, we're not negatively impacting downstream of the city, and two, if there's an opportunity to better handle both stormwater and drainage overall, and if that means doing something for Sure's Ditch, I think this would be a great opportunity to look at that, whether part of it could, pipe replacement, open up the ditch, whatever it may be. Some of our concerns are we don't necessarily have the same mindset on drainage, and a huge asset to our community is the Conservation Trust property. So we don't want to see action that would negatively impact Conservation Trust. So the thought of just lowering a pipe or increasing pipe size to get rid of water is not necessarily something that we see as the kind of highest value for our community, because we believe that is a very, very important asset to the community. So. Yeah, so, and Liz is here, and she may have some things to say as far as Conservation Trust. We met with the Conservation Trust, I think it was middle or end of last year, and in the conversation we asked the question if they would ever benefit from more water, and they said potentially, but they don't know. Like, it was something that we would talk about in the future. So part of our project is there's a control structure, and I think there's been confusion over that control structure. So that control structure would allow, in years where there is not a lot of water, for Conservation Trust to take more water. in regular operation, there's a weir structure that would maintain the pond, the basin level above what would come into it for a 100-year storm. So in regular operation, nothing heads to the south. And our design storm is a 100-year storm. If there is any larger storm than a 100-year storm, everything actually overflows to the north.
Saying everything, you're talking surface water.
Surface water. Yep. Yep.
Anyway,
Yep. Exactly.
my concern with the hole was the water stand that he kind of brought in front of us. That appears to me that it would let the water go back into the aquifer.
Yeah.
Out of the drainage pond.
Yeah, that's usually how you would build a basin. So that's pretty
I'm
typical.
just wondering on the impact of the soils around the pond. If they're going to be wetter than they were before, because this water will be going into the aquifer quicker.
Mm-hmm. And generally, you would see that downstream. So downstream is heading to the south. So you'd be looking at if there were any rise in water table, it would probably would not be significant in any way, and probably would be immediately adjacent or at the basin. So I don't necessarily see it pushing water upstream. That's not really how it would work. So.
That water goes downhill. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've got
Tell
a
me.
question that I don't know, kind of backlash is what I just said, and not going back into history, but somebody in here, and I'm thinking surveyor-wise, has had to have studied this area, and what goes to my mind is a topo map where how many acres above this 18-inch inlet that's been there since the beginning of time actually flow to the inlet that don't go to another watershed. Like in this watershed, from where the peak of the soil turns it to go to another watershed, how many acres of just flat ground are feeding into this 18-inch tile? Businesses, no businesses, nothing like that.
That's kind of a tricky question because the city has a huge handle on all the storm water that goes through this watershed. Correct me if I'm wrong, might all the way be from north of Industrial Park. This is a very large watershed that's seen an enormous amount of change over the last 50, 75 years through storm sewers that have sanitary and storm sewers that have been rerouted to the plant. So they've taken, the city in the past has taken a lot of water from the watershed away from Sure's Ditch that's gone through their combined sewer system directly to the plant. And some of the improvements that have been handed in the last 50, 75 years with the city's roads and streets and the railroad and Indiana, like Louis said, the State Road 2 has been demonstrably changed in the past when it got to be a limited access, 4 lanes. So the watershed is nowhere near, even in probably the last 30 years, what it was 75, 100 years ago. Because they have, I don't know, and the city might have those numbers, how much have they taken away from the watershed when they do combined sewers and sanitaries and redirect it through other pipes down to their treatment plant away from the pipe at the shores. So, I mean, in the drainage board's world, there's too much water, there's too little water. We have a fine balance that we have to do. And the city has the same deal to talk about when they have combined sewers, because they have huge stormwater inflows that overrun their sanitary sewers, and they have to stop it, treat it, make sure it doesn't go down to Travis. You're either going to the shores or you're going down to Travis, and they've redirected a lot of water in the past probably 30, 50 years in the combined sewers over to the Travis and not to the shores. At this point, I guess my question for Nick is that the wells are turned off, and the ones that are on are going through the city's sanitary combined storm sewer. So we don't have any flow coming from this pond in south out of the outlet weir, whatever it is, into the conservation ground. And it's receding presently as fast as the pipe can recede. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
And in the future, your 100-year storm will go north, back through the system that the city has, to the Travis, and not to the Shores.
Correct. Yeah.
So you've actually taken more water away from the Travis, or from the Shores, towards the Travis and the city's treatment plant.
Cop that just went by the door was
Well, in a larger than typical design storm.
Yes,
Yeah.
a larger
In any normal design storm, we are essentially taking away water from both the Shores and the
And
Travis.
then the other question, I guess, for the board is, the pond's deep, really deep.
Yeah.
So I presume you broke through the hard pan, which is quite lower than the fields that would be adjacent or north.
The pond should always have about a foot of water in it. So the pond was designed based on the geotechnical report. A foot, the bottom of the pond is 1 foot below the groundwater table, the normal groundwater
When
table.
Louis was here last month, he brought in some granular rocky substance, which I presume is the hard pan that got broken through. Because we have these problems all over the county. We run into ponds and we hit hard pan. Water doesn't flow through hard pan, it flows along the top of the hard pan. But if you've penetrated the hard pan, you've now increased its ability to get to the underground aquifer and recharge the watershed. So I guess it's a hard question to ask, that what watershed is left upstream of this pond or the Shores tile. It's probably, in my estimation, it's probably decreased, but we have a lot more hard surface, so it might be a neutral impact because we have more hard surface, but a lot of that's being taken away down through the city system to the Travis, not the Shores anymore.
Well,
So
your professional opinion on the work that's been done is an 18-inch hole that starts the Shore ditch enough?
If we had an 18-inch HDPE plastic pipe, it might handle most of the storm. But we don't have that. We have an 18-inch, whatever, 1918 clay tile that's probably had some impact with sheds and storage units, or not storage, sheds and pole barns, and need to be redirected. Now the city has asked us to work on a plan to find either fix that, open it, or redirect it somewhere else in open ground. So in my estimation, if we put a 48-inch HDPE tile in there, smooth wall, plastic, it would handle about anything they could throw at it as an outlet through the Shores, but it sounds like their design is not overflowing other than a huge event, probably a 500-year event.
Yeah, back-to-back 100-year storms.
Back-to-back 100-year storms or a 500-year event to actually peak out the south end of their pond.
And in that case, we have reduced by about 270 million gallons what would have otherwise been going downstream.
Sure. So at some point, the question this board's going to end up asking with the conservationists is, we can't take all their water away, because one of the items in this packet that Lily brought in is a 1950-some map from the archives of the GIS Historical Society that shows the ground was dry. Now, there is a 1930-something photo which shows the ground's wet. So, as nature changes its environment, sometimes it's wet, sometimes it's dry. I think the 58 photo, the 65 photo were dry. I think the 38 photo, if I'm correctly, was wet. And that Shores tile has a lot to do with it. The 18-inch was probably sufficient back in the day, but now if it's partially collapsed and not functioning as well as it could, it's not sufficient, no matter who throws water at it. So if they dig a bigger pond and redirect some of that more of that water away from the Shores tile, it just helps us out buying some time to replace that tile, which we don't have enough money, let alone the resources in the future, let alone a place to put it, because if people have built sheds and pole barns over it, I don't know if there's any elected officials going to start telling people to tear pole barns and sheds down while we plow through your yard and put the tile back in. So that's a leap this board has to work with that I think the city can help us.
What I think is really interesting too is if we go back before the tile, what's Ridgeway wetlands for the Conservation Trust is you're looking at a mile by half mile shallow lake. So in our opinion, an area that used to be a shallow lake is probably about the right place for stormwater. And I think we're looking at kind of a bigger picture where we where we use nature in responsible ways to help us manage our stormwater. And I don't know that, you know, maintaining that whole area as a drained lake, maintaining the parts that are currently farmed and will be farmed makes sense, but the entirety of that as a drained lake doesn't necessarily benefit the city in any way. We actually do have a pretty large stake in ownership at this point in that area that would otherwise be wet. So I think it's a really important to engage the Conservation Trust. It's really important to make sure that whatever we're doing with the 18-inch tile, if anything, it's kind of promoting the good natural resource work that's been done, and not impacting the land that's currently farmed, kind of north of.
How many acres are in this trust? 60.
Yeah. And then, when we talk about watershed, I don't know what the watershed is. I know what our model showed. So our model showed, we modeled an area that was 1,300 acres. So the area from our model starts at the outlet of the clay tile and north. So from the outlet of the clay tile in the field south of the tracks north, our model showed 1,300 acres. And they, shot inverts, and they climbed around in ditches and went through trees to locate, where everything was coming in order to determine where the boundaries of that study were.
Where do you think the most northerly part is, north of 2? How far away from this 18-inch opening till the watershed would go towards Lake Michigan?
Well, it probably ends up going to Little Kankakee at some part north and east.
Yeah,
North and east?
It's probably more towards the Kankakee.
All right.
Until you jump to Summit.
So when you're on this side of Vale Road, it heads that way.
So the red line's kind of the top of the watershed?
That's Phil right there.
And that's based on our engineers' analysis. So they, like I said, they did.
I was really
they
wanting to
use
see a
LiDAR.
map like this.
Yeah, they do. They use LiDAR, and then they ground truth it with actual survey topo data.
It's a little south of Seavers.
Yeah, a little bit south of Seavers, and then essentially over to Vale Road. And then you'll see in the map that, a lot of the city does not show up in that watershed because, the majority of the city is going into combined sewers.
Yeah, you have the Travis, you have the Shures, and you have the Little Kankakee.
Yeah. And likely, a portion of this area prior to development, prior to putting in combined sewers, would have also gone this direction. And again, that's why historically, before 1912 or whenever it was a shallow lake.
This, he keeps talking of, in this area, a lot of it goes into the city's existing storm drainage. And then you mentioned back going into the Shures. Does it dump into the Shures downstream from where we're having the problem?
No, Travis. So our combined...
So nothing else goes back into Shore except for above the 18-inch hole?
No, the Shures is open south of the tracks, and some you get farm field flowing into the Shures, surface water.
Yeah.
But the city's water that they've collected up above doesn't come back to the Shure to go to the Travis.
There's combined sewer right now on the far east side of town is going to the Travis.
Correct.
Yeah, all the city storm sewers and combined sewers that go toward the treatment plant wind up in Travis.
So the very
And
east,
the old city street drainage
Oh, yeah.
so the very far east of town has been bled off into the Travis.
rerouted towards Travis.
And then
So
you'll see
that's alleviated a lot to the Shure.
and the Kankakee is Little Kankakee is a very big watershed that takes a lot of water. That watershed is huge north and east of this. And then the Travis is the bulk of the city.
Okay.
And just for reference, our stormwater ordinance is not overly complicated. New development is required to handle the difference between the 2-year and 100-year storm. So they have to create storage on site for something between a 2-year and 100-year storm, and we allow discharge into our system at a 2-year rate in most cases.
All this is bled off.
I see there's, in the Indiana code, there's a provision for the city to take this drain over. the county can give it over?
I did see
You
that.
guys
in the code.
interested in that?
So I don't believe it would be appropriate until we either have an agreement with Spear Family Farm LLC or acquire enough property to do so, and then that would also need to be coordinated with the Conservation Trust. And I don't know that we. I mean, Jerry, I don't know that we have any
Taking all that.
issue looking at the opportunity to take over a portion of it.
It's not located.
The option's there if you're interested.
Not right now, no.
It's a little chunk.
Yeah. And the legal drain goes north beyond the 18-inch clay tile also. So,
Almost.
and that's why I think it'd be difficult without additional agreements in place to do anything like that.
Yeah, at this point, the city's property is not in, well, a little piece may touch in the regulated SURE's easement. But they do have discussions, and I've seen maps for, I don't know, 15 years, about the whole low area of the Spear Farm becoming storage and treatment area for surface stormwater with the development of the city going east. There's going to be a need.
Yeah, and wetland mitigation area as well. So we find that it's a good
We're
good
not
site for
talking
wetland
about,
mitigation.
the maps I saw, they're not talking about the high farmable ground, they're talking about the low ground that you struggle with that just stays wet sometimes and sometimes it's dry enough to plant.
Sounds like river dirt.
That's exactly what it is.
So just to reiterate, we're meeting with a few consultants that we've identified as having the ability to do adequate modeling for us to do a master plan. So I think that's going to be a really good opportunity. I think our goal would be to have the majority of that plan done by middle of next year, June or July. And we'll hopefully have a consultant selected by end of October, beginning of November. So I think that would be a really great time to reconvene either with this board or with county surveyor to start making sure that we're addressing the future of Sure's Ditch with anything the city would be doing. And then, like I said, the Conservation Trust has to be a part of that conversation as well.
I have one quick question for Tony. Something else that has come up with this. You talked about one possibility of this long-term plan being, if it's going to maintain as a ditch, increasing that 18-inch tile to 48-inch. Is there an issue on the downstream with the Sure's Ditch, or at least as far as I know, the county's only got it as a regulated drain till about Highway 4?
Yes, there are issues downstream that needs to be cleaned out in the Travis and the Sure's that have overgrowth, trees, impacts, individuals doing things that are slowing the water down that this board would have to look at if we had a 48-inch pipe full bore flowing, which I don't think we can because the conservations would be dry by then. But if we had a lot of rain coming down there, can the downstream capacity handle it? And that's something we're going to have to do. Jerry's been very well involved in that downstream capacity.
I was going to say, we've got some low ground adjacent to Sure's that we've always looked at. That do we need to detain Sure's and release at lower rate? We've got some ground that we're looking at for that purpose. Also for wetlands.
Yeah, and the growing concern of this board is you know just talk about capacity, just talk about filtration. You can't just put silted water downstream. You got to let it slow down and clean it up before you start letting it down further. But yeah, I mean, in our estimation, it's kind of good that this happened and Louie's been involved because we're looking at pushing forward, which we have for the past 10 years, and what to do about this tile. At some point, it has to be addressed. We have some new options that maybe we can leave the owners alone that have already built on top of it, so it didn't impact them. If we have some workable neighbors, we have to address it. I don't know where we're going to go because this is not going to slow down any. We've seen rains, we've seen infrastructure, and we have to do something for the volume and for the quality. So we're going to work on it. I mean, I guess it's kind of a blessing in disguise. If we can get something through there, before it's all developed. I mean, there's a potential interstate might come around the east side of town. I personally don't think it'll happen, but if that's go through, there's more impacts. We all know what happens when you start developing more roadway infrastructure. We get more development. So this board has to be concerned with what we're going to do in this whole corridor for this stretch that's piped. And then we have to be concerned, like Jerry said, what happens when we get all this new volume capacity flowing through, we have to be careful. It's a balance. We can't, too much water's not good and too little water's not good. We don't want to dry the farmer's ground out either. South County's going to see a lot of that too.
And we really intended to design a project that helped mitigate those concerns. We with the control structure and everything, like I said, we really want to handle our stormwater appropriately. We want to protect natural resources. Water is a very important resource for the city of LaPorte, and so we want to do our best to protect and not just keep sending it away and potentially impacting downstream.
The city of LaPorte's sitting on 130 feet with sand and gravel with water underneath of it. You don't have ever a problem of lack of water. But they used to float steam barges from lake to lake, the Rumley Corporation, I'm told, and I believe that, before the Kankakee River, before the Travis ditch was installed. The Travis ditch has nearly 50 feet of fall. There's no reason why we can't get rid of your water. 50 feet, and I don't even think it's 10 miles.
Yeah. And I think our biggest concern is when we get rid of our water, we don't want to be sending something downstream that shouldn't be going downstream. So we need to make sure that we're preserving kind of wetlands and green space and things that are going to help protect downstream water. So I think there's...
think of something. In 2003, I don't know if you paid attention, and I was running around in the private world, there were individuals in the North County that came to the county and wanted to put wells in to fill up Hudson Lake because it was so dry. 2003, I believe Pine Lake was at or below its legal lake limit. So we've seen some periods of really dry spells.
If you look at the ambient depth of water, it didn't drop 2 feet. It's normally around 18 feet. You look at the well monitoring stations. You're talking about surface water. I'm talking about subsurface water. Hasn't varied 18 inches in my lifetime.
And then Pine Lake, and Jerry might know this, 1940 something was a circuit corridor, and the cove where the condos are was a junkyard. There was no water in there, and there was islands out in Pine Lake, and you could drive across from the island of Pine Lake over to where Dairy Queen is. There was a road. So in not my lifetime, but in the last 75 years, we've seen some ups and downs in surface water that it's unbelievable. So at some point, that's what I was asking, the city might want to hold some of that water, definitely for the conservationists and for town, because it will dry up.
I get a lot of complaints that we keep the lake level too high, but you just stated exactly why we keep it as high as we do, because we cannot control low levels.
Yeah, you get too low, you can't put it back.
It's possible.
We do that in Hudson Lake. You can't put it back. So it's a balance. It's a tough balance. But my question is to Nick, where you're not pumping anymore. And if it's anything that's going to happen, other than a rare event, it's going to the north.
Yeah. And we're currently working with Arconic on some more acquisitions and things so that we can better manage what is going to the north and look at opportunities there.
We need to let some more people speak, or we're not going to have a very productive meeting.
I got one more question for Nick to address before we're done with that. You're talking about, and you just kind of hit on it too, you're looking at the quality of the water too, as far as what's going downstream. That was one of the concerns that came up last month, especially with the dewatering, is you do have a lot of industry and there's some potential for contaminated water. What has the city done to address that in the short term, and what are you guys doing in the long term with that?
Well, we sampled. So we sampled the dewatering water. I have the results if anybody wants to see them. It was non-detect on all the constituents. So there's non-detect on anything. I think there was concern with previous contamination at Arconic. Arconic was part of the voluntary remediation program. They underwent 28 quarters, so 7 years of monitoring of groundwater to make sure that the plume that was there from before environmental regulations stopped them from doing it wasn't expanding or wasn't getting at higher concentrations. It was stable or wasn't expanding. So in those 28 quarters, they were able to prove that, one, the plume on site was not moving, not changing, and that was kind of up under their original building. And then they also had sentinel wells along the edge of the property, and each of those wells had to meet drinking water standards. So for 28 quarters, those wells met drinking water standards. So there's no indication that there would have been any contamination moving off-site from that. I would add that, you know, our part of our drinking water supply is in pretty close proximity there. So I know first thing after the last drainage board meeting was I went to Todd Taylor with our water department and confirmed, and they've done sampling of the wells, and items been very involved to make sure that things aren't migrating off of that site. And then again, we sampled that discharge water and came up with non-detect for all the constituents. So.
I have one thing that I want to say. In this package, which I'll go through later on, but he's saying that they're only discharging an X amount of gallons per cubic feet per day into that wetland to the south. I have recorded on a video machine, I don't have it here, but I could bring it in sometime, but I've seen increases up to 1.5 inches per day over the outflow of that 18-inch tile. This comes off of the 1960 engineering book. An 18-inch tile at 0.7% grade. There's a chart. That 18-inch tile is discharging at Ohio Street 6 million gallons per day with no head pressure. That's to the top of the tile. There's up to 2.5 pounds of pressure. When you pressurize that pipe, it's going to go probably up to 8 to 9 million gallons per day on the outflow. How in the hell can it raise 1.5 inches? They're putting probably as close to 10 million gallons in there per day when they're at their peak. That's all recorded. I have it on on that camera. And the other thing is, he's coming up with figures. I found this last night from the Arconic site that stormwater pond with all of that new facility, the water draining into that stormwater pond just off of the Arconic site. The total annual flow to stormwater pond 1 is 2,242,200 cubic feet per year. If I had my calculator here, I could figure out how much, the total outflow just from that one site. That 18-inch tile cannot take it. He's coming up with false figures because there's no way in hell that 18-inch tile, when it's outflowing 6 million gallons per day off of this engineering chart, and it raises another 1.5 inches over probably 50 acres of land because the water at 54 inches was above ground. For it to raise 1.5 inches over that total area, you're probably talking 10 million gallons they were dumping on us. They're saying, oh, it doesn't hurt anything. That's why the water was running backwards in the tile up to the Spear Farm. He needs to come up with some facts, not some of the shit that he had. This is coming from the book.
Thank you. I'd like to also speak. I'm Nick Otis, the city attorney for LaPorte. And Mr. Adamski is right. We met with him. Nick Minnick and I, Nick the engineer, Nick the attorney, met with Brad, Commissioner Brzezinski, and Mr. Spear was there. Mr. Spear mentions we need to come up with facts, but here are the facts. Mr. Spear is not an interested property owner. Spear Family Farm 2 is the adjacent property owner. They're who the city bought the land from. He is not an owner of that. He is not an interested party. Okay? Second, I understand, and I wasn't at this meeting, but you guys voted to initiate an injunction against the city for this project. In order to do that, you'd have to go to court and establish a factual and legal basis to be able to do that. And the main basis for that would be irreparable harm. And Mr. Hendricks has spoken today, and he's also had emails that Nick Minnick provided to me, which indicate that we did not need to get a permit from this board. And so the county would not have a legal basis to go to court to get an injunction on this project. In fact, Mr. Hendricks, as he indicated today and indicated in the emails, says that this is a good project for the city and the county. And so I think in a good faith effort, Nick had indicated in the future we will, even if a permit is not required, we'll make sure our contractors come to you guys and have Mr. Hendricks go out and make sure that they're not necessary. But Mr. Hendricks did go out and look at this and determine that a permit was not necessary. And so we appreciate coming here today and talking about the bigger picture items, but this is a really important project, not only to the city, but to the county, and it alleviates a big problem of eliminating a combined sewer stormwater system that could potentially overflow human waste into your Travis ditch, which would be a very bad situation. And so this is a good project that benefits everybody. And Mr. Spear, if he wants to has standing to get an injunction, he can get his own attorney and do that privately, but he can't use you guys to do that because he is simply not an owner of property nearby, an affected owner, nor is he contracted to provide anything to the Spear Family Farm. And so if it was one of the owners, beneficial owners of that LLC, that'd be one thing, but he is just because his last name happens to share the name of the LLC doesn't give him standing to come in here and make these allegations against the city. So at your meeting today, we'd ask that you withdraw your motion to file an injunction. We've been willing to work with you guys this entire time, and it's unfortunate that it got off the wrong foot here.
Thank you. Okay, right here I have Louis Spear. I have power of attorney August 15th, 2019 to him and made concern. I authorized Louis Spear, father, to have power of attorney to handle any affairs associated with my share in the Spear Family Farm 2 LLC when dealing with the drainage issue on the Spear Farm and ditch. This encompasses dealing with the city, drainage board, or any other committee or entity, and he is to represent my interest in resolving this issue.
Louis, well, I'll go ahead and cut you off there. As far as the drainage board, I made this point to you, and I made this point at our meeting too.
Well, if he wants to make it,
that's fine, and I understand what you're saying.
Just to make it a part of the record.
I'm agreeing with you, though. What I'm saying is you don't need this for this board. All right, this board is talking about a regulated ditch. You've represented to me, and another property owner's represented to me that you can speak on his behalf. I think the board's concern was just about the Sure's ditch, not about your standing.
No,
so as the board's attorney,
and
I understand you want to address that,
it's just,
but I'm saying you don't need to make that point here with this board.
what he needs to do is, why don't you ask him as the attorney, where in the drainage laws does Tony have the authority to say we don't have any issue here? Have him come up here and speak in that microphone. Where in the Indiana drainage codes
I can answer that. It's 36-9-27-22. The board shall refer the request for consent to the county surveyor, who shall determine whether the regulated drain is adequate to handle the additional flow of water. It's right there in the statute.
Tony, can it handle the water? Give it a yes or no. At 54 inches backup, yes or no. Can it handle the flow?
The Sure's ditch, that the 18-inch pipe, does not have the capacity to handle the additional pumping. I guess the question for this board, which last month was, has it impacted anyone? And they hinged on Commissioner Rosinski that said there was some impact in the Spear Farm, and they took the action then because they said there was some crop damage north. I didn't see anything. I looked the area that Clarence and I always went to. I looked at the area, the impact, and I guess if we had some minutes, if they want to, the only person I saw that was getting impacted was the Conservation Trust. And if the city engineer, Nick, told me that they had been in discussions and whether they knew there was extra water being pumped on them, the impact was completely on them and their ground and the inlet to the Schurz ditch pipe. So is there can the Schurz ditch handle this capacity? No. Is the impact that this extra capacity, is it harming someone other than last month's meeting when Commissioner Rosinski said it was impacting some crops? I didn't see where it was impacting the Spear Farm. Actually, I have never seen the ditches that Clarence always pumped from be 4.5 feet underneath, lower than the ground at that area in the Spear Farm field. I've never ever seen it get that low. He's pumped 24 hours a day, 10 months out of the year when Clarence was around, and I've never seen it get that low. So they were pumping groundwater and actually reducing the soil moisture content on the farm that I've never seen it. It's always in the flood stage, like you said. It's always been flooded or near flooded, and you're constantly pumping, trying to keep it dry. So that was my interpretation as a county surveyor. There was extra water. Was it impacting anyone in a negatory sense that would come to us and say they're going to file an injunction, they're going to seek relief? And I didn't see any of that other than what the board said last meeting, and I didn't know if the conservationist had. I have never talked to the conservationist. I know Elizabeth, I hadn't talked to her, I didn't reach out to her, but the city engineer, Nick, said they had been in communications.
The other question, Tony, is, has land use changed since 1916? Well, the land use changes where all of it's now industrial, commercial, parking lots. What Helmet is sending 3,000 feet closer to where it was, all of their stormwater, that 2.5 million cubic feet per year, it would stay up there by.
I wasn't going to discuss that, Lou, until the meeting, but I'm glad you brought it up because the map, and that's what I wanted to see, because I thought that's what the facts were. The map by their engineer shows that Howmet Pond, the new pond that's Arconic built, is actually flowing to the west to the Traverse outlet. It's not flowing to the Schurz. Their pond and their watershed does not show that in this watershed going to the Schurz. And that's what I suspected when Howmet built that, Arconic built that addition in the new pond. It was flowing to the west, and if the cities are shaking their head like, yeah, that's what happens, that's actually less of an impact of any that potentially would have gone to the east on Boyd or over to their other wetland and into the Spear Farm. So that pond actually is very deep and very big, but their watershed map, is what I suspected, is flowing to the southwest to an outlet somewhere on the tracks.
Before we adjourn this workshop, because it's getting where we got to start a regular meeting, I'd like the lady to speak from the Conservation Trust, if she would. So I want to hear about any impact that she's concerned with. That's a big concern for our long-range plan stuff.
Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth McCluskey. I'm the president of the LaPorte County Conservation Trust. We own the 60-acre wetland that we call Ridgeway Wetland. That area was originally a shallow lake, as has been stated, and I have a couple of maps of it showing it. It was named after the Ridgeway family, who were the landowners at the time. And some of these show what the area looked like originally with the big wetland, and some of them are the natural wetland inventory maps from about 94 or 84. So there's just a couple of these that we'll have to show. This is the original page. And this is what the area looks like now with the Republican mark on there. So we bought the property in 2004. Somewhere in the, of course, as you know, 100 years ago, that area was drained through the Shures Ditch and turned into cropland and pasture land. Apparently, later on, it must have filled up with water again somewhat because there are 60 acres and probably about 40 acres that are owned by other people to the east of us, mostly out in the county, is wetland again. So I'd say it's about 100 acres of whatever was there originally is now basically wetland again. So then also sometime in about the late 1970s or early 1980s, the landowner at the time started digging out peat, which is what's created that really strange looking area of open water mixed in with the area that's emergent wetland with cattails and other vegetation such as that. So we bought it when it looked like that, and we have had it. We had it surveyed. This is what it looks like on the ground. It's a very odd-shaped area. And, the little jog to the side is what goes down to the outlet.
This is off of Fail Road.
That has the 18-inch pipe on it.
See, there's wetland open back to the right.
So we own where the outlet is. This is where it drops in the ground. We met last November 16th with the city, Mr. Minnick and Mr. Jackson, to discuss different things about the area. You know, about one of the things was the new floodway maps for the city lakes, and about LaPorte Landing and other issues, which also included the Ridgeway wetlands. So here's a copy of my notes from that.
Not draining into the 18-inch.
Here's an 18-inch right there.
On the second page,
So we walked on the south. It's right
they
there.
brought up about wanting to have water
Wait a second.
pond out there, the water retention basin. And what we said was, well, it's not really such a bad idea to have more water, provided that it's regulated, meaning that they can control the water level so that it doesn't suddenly jump up. When the birds are nesting out there, we have sandhill cranes, which are a state species of special concern, that are nesting there for the last several years. And we have soar rails. We've confirmed both. And of course, we have ducks and geese and other birds like that that are out there, and various other wildlife. So we don't want the water jumping up all of a sudden during the nesting period, because it would drown the nest and kill the eggs or the young. So we said we'd be happy to work with the city and the county. In fact, we had met with Tony previously to talk about possibly doing something to control water and work things out for the benefit of everybody. But we wanted to have clean water. So we suggested something about having a wetland basin in this new structure that the city was going to build, or to have a constructed wetland downstream between that structure and our property. And that was the last discussion we had with the city on this proposal. So myself and one of our other board members were out there on August 7th meeting with some contractors that we wanted to hire to do some work out there, and we saw that the water level was enormously high. In fact, we had never seen it so high, including in the last two very, very wet springs. The only way we could access the east side of our property, we were parked on the east side, and the only way we could get to the west side was to walk the railroad track, because we couldn't walk through our property because it was completely underwater.
And that was
even the part that's usually upland.
From these pumps running, right?
Yes, and that was the first we knew that anything was going on, because we couldn't figure out why, after a dry summer, the water level was so enormously high. And we thought, well, there must be something massively wrong with the 18-inch outlet, something deer carcass or something jammed in there, and we couldn't figure out why the county hadn't done something about removing it and getting the water flowing again. And just as we were leaving, Mr. Spear came by and said that he was coming to measure the water level at the outlet. And we asked him what was going on and if he knew why the water level was so high, and he said that it was because the city was building this thing on Boyd Boulevard and we're pumping groundwater. That was the first we knew. The city never told us that they had started construction. They never told us they were pumping water. They never said anything to us at all. The first notice we had from them was an email that Mr. Minnick sent to myself and board member Robert Boltland, which said that, well, we've started working out there and we'd like to talk to you, and we had to do some pumping, which we didn't expect. And, just sometime this summer we want to get together with you and talk about it. So this is a copy of the email, so exactly as it appeared, except that I moved the section and I sent messages back and forth trying to figure out when we could meet. This was the only notice we got from the city that anything at all was going on out there. So I found out about last month's drainage board meeting, and I watched the video of it. And on Labor Day, I went out on the site because I knew they wouldn't be out there doing anything, and walked around and looked at it. And by then, they had already finished the groundwater pumping into our property, but then they had finished putting in the pipe and all of that. So this is a picture of what they turned out they were doing, at least some of the water. I'm not sure about all of it, but there is a west side ditch on our property that is a private ditch that is 100% on our property. And we don't know if it was dug at the same time that they were doing the peat mining or what, but it's normally always dry. It's just there in sort of our western boundary, and it makes a loop on the south, and it kind of goes in from all that stuff to the railroad. There's 50 different ditches that were there, and then eventually it goes out the outlet.
Do you notice if your water level's receding yet?
Yeah, there was no water in this western ditch at the time I was there on Labor Day. But no water was being dumped into it at that time either.
So it has retreated to a comfortable area right now, or a comfortable level?
This is what it looked like where they were dumping. And they say that the water was clean. I know that when you dump groundwater that's heavy and iron on the surface, it'll create stuff that looks like that with the heavy metal content. And if you'll notice just behind that clump of vegetation in the middle, that there's some kind of piles of something or other, and I don't know what it was. It was just some filthy looking things, like it might have been filled with sand or something or other, but there was just this stuff lying there in this ditch. I don't know if they were had been pumping anything into the north ditch, which flows along the north side of our property. I noticed in the last month's meeting that Mr. Spears said something about remembering when that north ditch was dug. And it was sometime in his time, in his memory. We had always thought that that ditch was entirely on our property. We don't know for sure, because it's hard to tell, although I have some documentation here showing that it is. But when you look at Beacon, you can't tell. So we had a survey done, which Tony's group took care of. And I've got the stuff here. And I tried to find it on the Google Earth before coming here. And it's got some crazy numbers on here about south 86 degrees, 36 minutes, 0 seconds east. And all I could come up with was 3641. So I don't know where 8641, so I don't know where this came from. But this is actually, what it looks like in the survey. So I'm sure that Tony can find it out there on the ground. But,
yeah, we did your side and we did the Spear side. My dad did back a couple decades ago, and that ditch was on your side.
So that ditch is entirely on our side.
On your side.
Okay, that's what it looks like on this old Sidwell map, which I also dug up. I don't even know if they even still exist anymore. But it shows the ditch
Yep.
on our property, and here is, I think this is Shores coming down here.
I think 15 years ago I staked that
I
myself.
think this is actually Shores to the middle, and this other one is some other thing.
No, it's right on.
The Shores runs along that line.
The Shores is right here.
Is this Shores?
Yes.
Okay, so the Shores is not really through our property.
Yes.
No, this is our property line, this black line.
No, I know, but that's where the Shores is.
Okay, well, we had always thought it was this thing through the middle, but anyway, yeah, this thing shows that we own it entirely.
Yeah.
So on Labor Day, when you were out there, were you pleased with the water level that was there then?
I did not go down to the outlet and see what it was. I was only looking in the construction area.
On your own property, knowing that water receded,
The water was down on that north end, but I have no idea what it was like on the south end because I did not go down there.
so you right now would say it's almost back to normal, so it shouldn't be hurting any wildlife?
I have
right
no
now?
idea what it's like on the south end, but on the north end where these pictures were taken, the water was not standing. But I do not know where the water started to stand because I was never up in that area when the water was being pumped. On Labor Day, the water was being pumped into the new basin. So whatever was had been in here, this is what the new pipe looked. Somewhere in here, the new pipe went in. And that is looking basically east down the north ditch. And I don't remember that last time,
New
at the last
pipe.
meeting,
What
someone...
new pipe?
What?
What new pipe?
Right.
The pipe that comes out of the basin. If they have a pipe that comes out of the basin, goes underground, and goes into that spot right there.
That's close to that 18-inch?
This is the upper northwest corner of our property, and the Shores Ditch outlet 18-inch pipe is on the far southeast corner of the property. So the whole 60 acres, 100 acres of the other person's property, all is in between.
Okay.
But
Can you hang around for our regular meeting that we're going to start in a little bit?
sure, well, I'm almost finished anyway.
Could you give this copy of the iron deposits to the city so they can see what we're dealing with?
You were asking what was the height on Labor Day? Yes, Labor Day weekend. I think the first was like 48, 49 inches. But I did check it. It was about 48.
Well, this seems like the biggest thing that was affected from the high water. And when things get rebuilt, we got to make sure that this stays put at a certain level. We need to find a level that we call for this conservancy district.
We have to find a balance for that.
Right. I mean, that's the job we got to do before we move really on what we're going to do next to preserve this.
Yes.
This is a close-up of the west end of that northern ditch, but this is the west end of it, and then it goes east in another, I think it was 1,700 feet to get over to Shores Ditch. So all that work was done without ever contacting the LaPorte County Conservation Trust and telling them that they were on our property holding this. And this is a picture of the emergency outflow from the new structure. They're from their new pond. It looks like it's about 6 feet in diameter. And it apparently flows down underground about 10 feet and drops into the 18-inch pile coming out that goes into that. And
Ever gets this high.
it seems rather strange to me to think that water can go through a 6-foot thing like that and drop within a few feet into an 18-inch tile and withstand heavy flows. If you remember 11 years ago right now, early September of 2008, Hurricane Ike came up from Texas and hit us, and we got about 11 inches or more of rain in a 24-hour period. I can't help wondering if this thing would withstand something like that. I don't know what 100-year flood or 500-year flood or whatever that thing was, but would this blow out? Would this blow out and blow everything from this pond down into Ridgeway wetlands? So that is one of the big questions we have. And the other question I have for the city is, was a wetland delineation done before this work was done? If so, we would like a copy of it. Was the Corps of Engineers contacted and IDEM contacted to find out if you needed a Section 404 permit to do this work? And if so, I'd like a copy of the permit. But the real question is, why did you go across our property and not tell us? Thank you.
Thank you.
We need to stay out of it until they figure out. We went through it with the sheriff's.
I think we're gonna have a short recess before we start a regular meeting. I need to use the facilities for that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Too much information.
Anybody need water?
What's that?
Anybody need any water?
All right.
Drinking mine.
So we'll close the workshop. We'll have our regular meeting here after a brief recess. Anybody wants to stay around for the regular meeting, feel free to do so.
You're not kidding me.